Let's rewind back to January 15th, 2019. This was the day that sent me down the journey towards understanding what it means to be intentionally human. This was the day I first heard Houston Kraft speak. Houston is a kindness advocate and empathy extraordinaire who has devoted his entire life to the intentional acts of kindness, love, empathy, and vulnerability. Fast forward almost 2 years, and Houston is now a good friend of mine and one of my biggest influences. This conversation sparked when I found out Houston was dropping a new book on September 29th called Deep Kindness. So for those of you who are looking to get a bigger scoop of what Houston is and everything he stands for, go get his book, Deep Kindness, which drops tomorrow, September 29th. I hope you all approach this episode with an open heart and open mind, and continue to be intentionally human. All right. When you spoke at my school 2 years ago, my life completely changed. And I can only imagine that you've spoken at hundreds and hundreds of schools, and that there's probably hundreds of Haydens in that audience who have all received that message and really taken it to heart. I know personally I have, and so this is really cool to see someone who has that impact now creating something in readable form that can be there for hundreds and hundreds of years, hopefully, fingers crossed, that will hopefully be put into the canon at some point, which would be amazing for the book canon for schools. But seeing that impact being put into not only virtual form with your with Character Strong and the curriculum that you're doing there, but also in book form now, which is just incredible. And so the ability to read about kindness and from someone who practices it on a daily basis, I think is going to be really beneficial for our future generations. And so I'm beyond stoked for you, and I'm beyond happy and just super grateful to have someone personally in my life, but also someone out there who is making impact on a daily basis. And so with that said, you did create a book, which is awesome. So Tell me the concept behind it, and one, tell me about the title and how you came to that, but also to kind of tell me the concept behind that.
I like the language. I created a book, not write a book. It's been created. And I think it does feel a bit more than writing it, because for many years I was a speaker. As you alluded to, I got a chance to hang out in your school and literally 600 others over the course of the past 10 years, and have been speaking pretty consistently on the same concept, right? Which is around compassion, empathy, connection, what we can do to be better for ourselves and for each other. And really, I suppose over the past couple of years, the topic has shifted to more not just we should be kind, but wait, why aren't we? What is it that gets in the way of us living in the kindest version of the world that I think many of us think about, dream of, can see, but sort of collectively we aren't accessing. And so, the book in many ways is a creation of 10 years of working in schools individually, and then working in schools sort of systemically. So a few years back, you mentioned Character Strong, which I started with my friend John, and the premise of Character Strong is okay, instead of me just wandering school to school talking about a thing, how do you weave it into the system of education? How do we teach those social, emotional skills that allow us to take better care of ourselves and each other? And all of this over the course of a decade has percolated. And anytime you do something with a ton of repetition, you find the details, right? You uncover the tiny little gemstones or nuggets that if you do something for a short period of time, maybe you discover some cool nuances, but you don't discover the depth of these individual facets. And I found out with kindness is just telling stories over and over again, listening to stories from students in schools, thinking about how to do it at a systemic level and an individual level, and in my own life is now what. So you ask why we called it Deep Kindness. I was sitting on the beach last year in the fall, alone, And I was sort of rolling some stuff over in my head. I'd just done a talk where in a moment of sort of passion, there was like a moment of clarity. And the moment of clarity was I'd been to so many schools where I saw this poster. Maybe you've seen it before or heard it before, but it's throw kindness around like confetti. And in 600 schools, I've probably seen that poster in at least 500 of them, right? It's common. And if it's not that one, it's something else. Just be kind or sprinkle kindness around. It's free, right? The implication is that kindness should be given freely. And in many ways, the implication is that kindness could be given freely because it doesn't cost us anything. And I think that's where we've gone unintentionally wrong. So the idea was to call it confetti because I wanted to fight back against this narrative that kindness is at all like confetti, right? Because the implication there would be it's as simple to toss around or throw around in our lives as just throwing these little pieces of paper in the air. And I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble because as a society, as a culture, as a world, I think in many ways we discuss kindness as if it were that simple. And when we think about something as simple, we don't give the right time or energy or resources or money or effort, right? We don't allocate resources to support something that we think of as easy, right? When we think of something as really hard, it's sort of like all hands on deck. We have team meetings and we have planning and strategy sessions and we bring in the resources and we pay the consultant and we do all these things to support this big project or this complicated endeavor. But we think of kindness as almost like this inborn thing or this thing that's really would be nice to have. And the book argues that it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, that it's the most essential ingredient to a functioning society. And it's the most essential thing that we could do right now to figure out how we heal a world that is very evidently hurting and in many ways broken. And so the argument of the book is that we have to actually move away from confetti kindness and more towards deep kindness. Deep kindness then is what the whole book's about, which is investigating what is quote unquote the kind of kindness the world needs. And I spend the whole book arguing about it, but basically I'm saying the kind of kindness the world needs requires the skill of empathy, right? It requires a level of forgiveness with people that we disagree with or who've hurt us. It requires a sense of emotional regulation and the ability to understand what we're feeling and choose against those feelings in certain situations, to show up for people, even when we don't quote unquote feel like it, right? It requires a sense of courage to overcome a lot of the things that we take for granted that are scary about kindness, right? There's the opportunity to fail people. There's the opportunity to be embarrassed or be rejected or be humiliated. Maybe we're navigating our own sense of shame that we have to overcome in order to give something to others when we don't think we're even worthy of something ourselves. We have to make time for it, right? And in a world of busyness, there's actually legitimate studies that have been done on compassion. And one of the biggest barriers is simply people feeling like they're in a rush, right? So if we don't prioritize kindness into our day-to-day world or our schedule, then we're not going to allocate time to do it because we're overwhelmed. And we're all overwhelmed all the time. And in a culture that values productivity and achievement, sometimes kindness doesn't make the cut, at least on a day-to-day practice. So my publisher, Simon & Schuster, they said, let's not call the book the thing that we don't want people to do. So let's not call the book confetti. Let's call the book Deep Kindness and frame it as a revolutionary way to discuss this thing in the world, right? A reinvention of the way we speak about it and the way that we think about how we can get better at it in our life and put it into the world. That's the short version of a long story.
Yeah, I love that. And I kind of think it's funny, like in a way, how we are matching like right now,
Yeah.
because something that I wanted to bring up is the way that how I want to imitate the way that you practice kindness and the way that you practice gratitude on a daily basis. So in an ironic way, yes, we are matching, but also I seek to imitate the way that you do practice these very difficult topics to practice, which are kindness and empathy and compassion and gratitude. They should be easy, but why do they seem to be so difficult in this society? And so for you, what would be 3 ways or 1 or 2 that we can practice kindness, gratitude, compassion in a kind of simple way so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the acknowledgement and just sort of sharing your desire to echo or imitate some of those things. I think that first and foremost, like our role, especially as we grow into ourselves and figure out a bit more about who we are and who we want to be, like the number one thing that we can do to shape the world in kindness is to role model it. And by zero means am I, do I have that totally streamlined and figured out in my life? But yeah, in many ways I have the luxury of having made a living and really my life like out of the pursuit of talking about, teaching, thinking about kindness. So I just do it a ton, which has allowed me to integrate kindness in some simple ways, or at least think about ways that other people can wrestle with kindness in their own life. The first way I might offer would be to reframe a bad habit into a good one. So a lot of people talk about like breaking bad habits, and especially during the time of like quarantine where anxiety's up and many of us are already dealing with a lot of other tough things in our life or even traumatic things in our life. Sometimes the premise of like breaking a bad habit right now feels a bit overwhelming. So what if we were to reframe a bad habit by incorporating something good into it? So simple example, let's say you're the kind of person like me occasionally who will fall asleep with their phone near them, even though I know I'm not supposed to. I know I'm supposed to keep it in another room. But usually I'll check my phone before bed, and a lot of times it's the first thing I look at when I wake up. So what if during this quote unquote bad habit, I'm able to catch myself and I say, okay, I can't go 3 posts without saying something, commenting something meaningful, sharing this thing on behalf of a friend, sending them a message about, oh, I really like this, or want to celebrate you for this thing. So I'm still doing the quote unquote bad habit, this thing that I'm not able to break right now, but I'm incorporating an act of kindness into it. So I'm taking something bad and making it at least partially good. So that's one way we could incorporate some level of kindness into our life. Part 2, I think a lot about specificity and how specificity both drives action and drives meaning. So a lot of times when I talk about confetti kindness, I talk about that desire for us to do that sort of generalized, like the most common would be like, let's put Post-it notes all over the school or the hallways, or maybe more at large, they're like the free hugs that sometimes we used to see before we weren't allowed to touch each other anymore. But sort of like those mass marketed big actions of kindness. I want to be super clear because I know this is important. The book does not outright dismiss confetti kindness as not valuable, right? I think that those fun, random, poppy, colorful acts are important, right? They're like hope bringing, and they can be silly and playful, and they can inspire people. But when you think about the sort of type of kindness that moves people forward in their personal life, it's almost always very personal to them. So I use a strategy in my brain that I call intersectional thinking, where I take 2 sort of categories, bring them together in a little Venn diagram type shape, and I think about what exists in the middle of that. So a simple exercise would be, if I know someone, maybe it's like you, Hayden, I know that you're passionate about community and you're passionate about empathy. Those are 2 things that I know that you care about a lot. So I think about like, what's the intersection of community and empathy? What's in between there that you could make an action of kindness towards? And if I'm having trouble thinking about one that feels really specific and good to me, I might add another circle. I'm just increasing the Venn diagram, which the more overlap you have, we're increasing the specificity of that act. Right? So I know that you care about community, I know you care about empathy, and I know that your mom plays a big role in your life as someone who's like a really cool supporter and a good role model for you. So what would it look like to do an action of kindness that intersects those 3 things? Right? And this is just off the top of my head because I have a structure to think about this. So it might be that you make a video introducing or celebrating your mom to a community that's important to you and talking about how she's been a role model of empathy, right? So maybe that's, I know you just started college, so maybe it's some people in your college class or group that you join, or maybe you become a part of some clubs and you could share, hey, this is a role model in my life and she's taught me a lot about empathy because blank. Or I know that you've been a part of other communities like good workhouse type things. Like I know you have an intersection in some of my communities here in Los Angeles. So that would be an action of kindness in my brain that is really specific, and it celebrates your mother in a way that honors some things that you care about, like community building and developing your own sense of empathy. So how cool would it be if you shared with your mom, you didn't tell your mom you were doing it, but you put together this video, you shared it with the community, and you asked people to respond with like one word that they felt when you shared about your mom being a role model. And then you showed her that thread and said, hey, I just wanted to thank you for what you've given me. Now that action obviously is more directly impactful to someone like your mom than potentially walking through an area and someone giving her a free Air 5, right? Or just handing out her a note that says, you're awesome. Right? Sort of that general sense of confetti kindness is lovely and inspiring, but it doesn't always make deep impact on people's individual lives, because specificity is what's meaningful to me. If you know me well enough to understand what I need, in giving me or serving those needs, that's an action of deep kindness. The last one would be thinking about what other skills can I work on in my life right now that inform my capacity for kindness. So in the book, I talk a lot about empathy. I talk about forgiveness. I talk about vulnerability. I talk about emotional regulation. I talk about expanding our vocabulary to use more interesting words that can speak to people more specifically. So I might think, okay, in order to get better at kindness, one thing that I can improve on is forgiveness. Who could I forgive in my life that frees me up to practice kindness towards them? And in the book, I talk about kindness as separating the human from the hurt, separating the person from the behavior. Right? This person might have done a bad thing, but they're not a bad person. So how can I separate that action from who they are and see them for their hurt, for what they're going through, from their circumstances, instead of the action that hurt me directly? Right? I'm practicing that ability to distance. And in doing so, it allows me to take that thing not as personally. Now, does this technique work for all people in all circumstances? Of course not. But if I can practice forgiveness and build up that skill, well, guess what? I'm strengthening the foundation that allows me to practice kindness in other areas of my life. Because a lot of times kindness requires forgiveness. I'm having this circumstance right now on Facebook and other social medias, especially with the election coming up, and having these conversations. I know this is important to you. Having conversations that are actually valuable, productive, as opposed to inflammatory and just conflict generating. It actually requires disciplined forgiveness and then intentional kindness on the far side, right? So the forgiveness or the discipline is to remove my anger or frustration at someone's response, which could feel ignorant or misinformed or inflammatory in the first place. I have to calm myself there. It's emotional regulation mixed with forgiveness. This person just gets their media from this source, or maybe they don't know any better and they've been told by someone they care about X, Y, or Z. Cool. Now my action of kindness is to honor them by maybe reading that thing or doing my own research and then just asking questions. So those would be my three sort of like categorical recommendations: is reframe bad into good, use intersectional thinking to drive specificity, and try to cross-train the skills that live beneath kindness so you can get better at the action of kindness itself.
Yeah, those are great practices, and it's something that I'll definitely going forward try to practice, because I think a lot of the time we want to be kind, but sometimes because it isn't a practice, it's not something that we do on a daily basis, we forget like that it is important. And so just like you can't play a game without practicing, if you want to be properly prepared for life, you have to practice these things that are important to not only us, but to others on a daily basis. So yeah, it is something interesting to think about. And what I liked about all three that you kind of talked about is they all fell into one Venn diagram for me, and that was intentionality. So being intentional with our kindness, being intentional with our forgiveness. And so do you believe that being intentionally kind is the way to pursue deep kindness?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really great, simple, sort of categorical description of what deep kindness is about, which is recognizing that the practice of this sort of kindness I think the world craves right now is going to require us to move beyond when it's convenient, when it's comfortable, right? And put it into practice even when we don't necessarily feel like it. So we're starting to bring in like the discipline that's required for us to start to build it into our day-to-day practice. And then we're bringing in the thoughtfulness, which says, what does a 5-pound action look like for me today? So that next week I can lift the 10-pound version. So that the week after that, I can lift the 30-pound version. And I think about that when it comes to, you know, a lot of people are being necessarily asked to dig into anti-racist work, right? What does it mean to be an anti-racist? Well, for most people, it's not a switch that we flip in order to immediately improve in those conversations. We need to break down that work and to say, what is my 5-pound effort today? What is my 5-pound piece of learning today, piece of listening today that allows me to do this at the 10-pound level, the 20-pound level, the 30-pound level, right? The analogy you make is great with the game and the practice. You can think about it as the weights and the gym and eventually trying to become stronger, right? You don't walk into the gym and lift 100 pounds on the first day unless you're trying to hurt yourself. And people do that. And that's kind of the challenge of like kindness is like sometimes we try to offer ourselves at really big moments and we make ourselves exposed to a ton of risk. And then when it doesn't work out or we stumble our way through it and it hurts, we actually contract, right? We're like, oh, I'm not doing that again. That kind of sucked. You know, you can apply that to kindness. You can apply that to anti-racism. People are like, well, I'm trying to help. But intentions don't matter when you're trying to lift the 100-pound weight in the same way they don't matter in the action themselves, right? We have to train over time to actually get effective at this stuff.
Yeah, and that you bring in an interesting point of if you go into the gym and try and lift 100 pounds right away, you are going to get hurt. And so I know a lot of kids in my generation, not kids, but a lot of teenagers in my generation, we are scared of this idea of vulnerability because we see it as a weakness or we see it as something, well, every time I've opened up to someone, then I've gotten hurt. Well, it's how do we practice vulnerability in a way where it's, okay, yeah, it's little steps. It's the 5 pounds, it's the 10 pounds, the 30 pounds, and then the 100 pounds. So when it comes to practicing kindness, gratitude, all those other things, how do we practice vulnerability in a way that is not where we're completely exposing ourselves and opening ourselves up to be hurt and then we contract, but how do we practice vulnerability in a healthy way where we're slowly working ourselves up to be, okay, I can now be vulnerable with anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, think about the circles again, but instead of the Venn diagram model, think about like the ripple in a pond model. Think about the target. So instead of throwing darts, I think about it as like targeted impact or targeted vulnerability. And you say to yourself, who are the people that I have most immediate access to that I trust with my heart or with this sense of vulnerability? Meaning, I have this thing that I'm passionate about. What 1, 2, 5 people could I talk to about this? That still feels like a level of vulnerability, but it's much safer than the masses, right? And what does it look like to share something with them? Does it look like sending them a few messages and just like having a conversation about it? Does it mean just even bringing it up casually and seeing how people respond, right? There's all kinds of incremental shifts that we can make there to start to build up that vulnerability muscle, that courage muscle. And then if you're thinking about it as that like sort of target, like, all right, I've thought about it for myself first. That's the center. A little bit farther out, it might be your best friend. It might be your mom. It might be a grandparent. It might be a teacher. Go a little bit farther out. What would it look like to share this with that next level of 5 to 10 people that I don't know as intimately, as well? And what does it look like to share vulnerably with them and even receive feedback from them about whatever the thing is, this idea, this thing that I want to talk about, this thing I want to stand for, right? And you can get the picture of where this goes. And the farther away you get from yourself, the less control you have over people's reaction to the thing, which is why probably if you like are really excited about something, the inclination might be to share it at large, but that's also the highest risk of being vulnerable and the highest risk of people interpreting something that you have very little control over. I know I'm going to face that with the book. I've already had comments and reviews of people being like, well, I didn't really like this. And I'm like, well, you didn't understand this. And so in many ways, a book is one of the most like publicly vulnerable shares I could do. But I've also spent a lot of time talking about it like this I've been talking about it. I started talking about it with classrooms, and then I started talking about it at conferences, and then I went to campuses, and then I went to, like that's been the process for me of speaking about this thing. Is I started in a safe way and built my way outwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that analogy that you used of like you throw a rock into a pond and it ripples out. It really does, because it starts with you, right? You have to understand, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable with myself. I am going through this experience, this emotion, this feeling. And then, okay, who is my most intimate group that I can talk about it with? And that may not even be someone in your family. It may be a friend who you're super close with. And so how do we just open up slowly but surely, in
Yeah.
a way to practice vulnerability? Um, and that kind of leads me to my next question, because I believe that if my generation practices this, so there's your generation who's teaching and listening to us, and then there's my generation who's getting that and is trying to actively practice it. Now, what's my responsibility for the next generation? How do I continue to pass this message on? And how do we get the next generation to believe that kindness is really kind of the way of the future? The kindness is something that we as human beings crave and something that we need.
Yeah. Um, I talk a lot in the book about language being important because it sort of it's the way we orient ourselves in the world. And so I think that, and you already see, you have a sense of how this is changing, but there's still a lot of work to do. But like the definition for success, the definition for happiness, definition for what it means to live in a community, the definition for connection, right? Those things, they are defined obviously dictionarily, but they're also defined culturally and behaviorally. And one of the best things that I think a lot of people, even in my generation, started to do was push back against some of the narrative that our worth is tied to our career, right? That our worth is tied to our income. Now, did my generation destroy that paradigm? No, but I think they did reinvent, right, some of the things about what it meant to be successful. And I think the more that we continue to change that narrative in the workplace, what it means to be successful in school, what it means to be happy at home with myself, among other people, the more that we can change that definition through our behaviors, that's one of the greatest gifts we could pass on generation to generation, is the way that we shape those words, because those are the things that our culture breeds us to want. We want to be happy, we want to be connected, we want to be successful. So if we're able to change what those things mean through what we pursue and what we give our time to, that's the sort of like long-term ripple effect we can't quite comprehend. But of what it will do for the next group of young humans as they look at the world and be like, what does it mean for me to be successful? If your generation does more, stands firmly on what it means to be truly successful, is the number of people we help, the number of communities we serve, to leave people better than we found them, especially those who don't have as much power or privilege as us, then we're off to a good start.
Yeah, and I love how you brought in how there is dictionary definitions, and then there are our own personal definitions, which allow us to understand the words and practice the words.
Yeah.
So one of your biggest words, the name of your book, is kindness. So there is a dictionary definition to that word, but what's your definition of the word kindness for you?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna always push back on this question because I spend a whole book defining it. And I think in many ways it is part of the problem to try to oversimplify something that that warrants deeper unpacking. But if I were to offer a shorter one, it would be the intentional practice of identifying needs and making sacrifices to meet those needs for ourselves and for others. Right? So there's intentionality mixed in there. There's a sense of empathy, a lens of empathy mixed in there. And then there's the practice element that weaves in this other component of like discipline and doing it when we don't necessarily feel like it, when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. So those are all themes of the book, would be our willingness to practice it against our feelings to meet people's needs and not necessarily their wants, and to discipline ourselves to do it, not just today or tomorrow, but make it a part of our lifestyle.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, it's so true. That intentionality aspect is crucial, and there's is a sense of sacrifice as well. But not a negative sacrifice, a positive sacrifice where we're actually helping others, and in turn we see that has a reverse benefit on us, because we see, oh, like there's that chemical, it rush into our brain. We're like, oh, helping people feels good. Like I really enjoy this. So being intentional and sacrificing it in positive and healthy ways. All right. So that leads me to our rapid fire questions section of this. So just a few, but if you can give me short, like sentence answers, that'd be amazing. So first question, what's your favorite book?
On Being Nice by the School of Life.
I'll have to look into that. Favorite teacher in high school, college, elementary school?
Oh, one for each?
No, one from any.
Overall.
Yeah.
Well, I never had him as a direct teacher, but John Norland, who I started Character Strong with, is one of the most intentional educators I've ever met.
Amazing. What was your favorite subject in school?
Theater.
Got it. Before Corona, what was your favorite travel destination?
Iceland.
I want to go there. I have a friend in Iceland.
Most beauty per square inch.
Yeah. What was your best experience speaking at a school?
Your school was one of them, because some kid came up afterwards and he gave me one of the best compliments, one of the funniest compliments I've ever received, which, hey man, my friend said you were boring, but he must not have been listening, because I thought you were pretty good.
That's amazing.
Legendary compliment.
Yeah. All right. Is it true that Houston Kraft is the best hugger and most professional hugger of all time?
Self-proclaimed? Sure. We can say anything we want, but I do like a good hug.
Yes. Does virtual hugging do in-person hugging justice?
Oh gosh, no. You know the answer to that. No way.
Yeah, exactly. And then final question, can any person read your book and take something away from it?
Oh yes, I hope so.
Yeah. Amazing. I so much appreciate you and the time you take to create impact in our world, and especially in the education field, because it's so necessary to teach the next generation about the ideals of kindness, love, empathy, vulnerability, intentionality, good, sacrifice, all those amazing things which have such hefty weight to them, but when broken down by you, make it so much easier. And yeah, if I could just say one thing to you, is just I appreciate you. And you have fundamentally changed the way that I look at the world, and how I look at people, and how I look at kindness. And that day when you spoke at my school, my life changed. And so I appreciate your kindness and your openness. And I hope that people receive the book well. And I hope that people start pursuing deep kindness and practicing it on a daily basis. And I just want to thank you for your time and for your just everything.
Thanks, man. I love you, my friend.
Yeah, love you too. Hopefully we can do a socially distanced 6 feet hug within like the next month.
That'd be good. Yeah. Won't be the same, but we'll get there one day.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time, and this has been amazing.